Welcome everybody to the Little Athletics New South Wales Sunday Coaching School. My name is Darren Wenzer. I am the Head of Coach and Volunteer Development at Little Athletics New South Wales. It is fantastic to have John Quinn as our guest today. Now, John is a level 5 coach whose career has spanned more than 35 years. He has worked with many of Australia's leading athletes and coaches across sports as diverse as track and field, soccer, swimming, AFL, rugby league, tennis, cricket, and Olympic bobsleigh. Now, just a few of John's accomplishments include being the sprints and relay coach for the Australian track and field team at the 2000 Sydney Olympic Games, head fitness coach and high performance manager for the Essendon Football Club in the AFL between 1998 and 2008, and that included a 2000 premiership, and high performance manager for the Greater Western City Giants Football Club in the AFL from 2010 to 2014. So welcome, John. It's absolutely fantastic to have you with us.
My pleasure, mate. It's great to be with you. And one of the highlights that you didn't mention was I worked for Little Athletics, and I was on a number of state teams as one of the team coaches. So I put that at one of my highlights.
And you do have a strong connection to Little Athletics, didn't you? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I started working at Little Athletics. I was 20, and I grew up in country New South Wales. And a job came up at Little Athletics, and I thought it was a great opportunity. So I made the move to the big smoke, and I was at Little A's from about 1985 to 1991 as Education Development Officer. And in those days, there were a couple of us, and we used to travel. I had my Mitsubishi L300 van with Little Athletics emblazoned along the side, and in the back I had my shot puts and discus and whatever, and off I'd go. We'd do about 140,000 kilometres every year, going from schools to running coaching clinics, camps, seminars, and my area was mainly Western New South Wales, so everywhere from Parramatta to Broken Hill and whatever was in between. I absolutely loved it, and very, very special time for my coaching career, I think, working for Little Athletics.
And it's fascinating. We have to touch back again on this grassroots to high performance, but we mentioned the year 2000 came up a couple of times in the introduction there, that biography, the 2000 Olympic team, the 2000 grand final. That must have been a busy time for you, John.
Well, it was a surreal time, and when I was involved, you just got caught up in the whole thing. And the thing about AFL is that it's a very much a week-to-week proposition. And the previous year, Essendon were probably, I'm a bit biased obviously, but the year before we were the best team in the competition, and we got rolled by our arch nemesis Carlton in the dying seconds of the game of the preliminary final. We got beaten by 1 point. So it really was a valuable lesson. I thought I knew it, but you really learned it then. Don't get ahead of yourself. And so 2000 was very much a year of don't get too far ahead of yourself. And it was a pretty unique year, and it still hasn't been broken. We only had one loss in that whole year, 24 wins and one loss for the whole season. And we were rocketing into a grand final, which it was surreal. We had all the grand final parades, which I was involved with as a high performance guy for the Bombers, and have the cavalcade through Melbourne. I mean, it's the number one religion in Melbourne, let's face it, and most of Australia it is. And so down we did all of that, and then the grand final was over in a blur, and we had all the celebration in the rooms after, and then my mind flicked. I had the Olympics to get to. And the next morning I was on a flight to Sydney and out to the Olympic Village, and it was only a few days later, I'm in the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games. It's a surreal thing, you know. It really, just even talking about it, you think, did that really happen? And the Olympics went by, you know, in a flash as well. And it's the memory of it is such a fabulous thing. And I'm very honoured individual to have been involved in even one of them, let alone two like that.
Yeah, no, they're absolutely amazing. And John, you mentioned a little bit about the early years. Let's wind it right back. Where did you grow up, John? And what was your early involvement in sport as a kid?
Yes, I grew up in a country town of Yass, which is about 45 minutes from Canberra. And my mum's side of the family had been there. I think we were the second card after Hamilton Hume, so we're definitely locals down that way. And I grew up playing rugby league. In Yass, you played rugby league, or if you're one of the girls, you played netball. And then in the summer, you did cricket, and you probably went to the swimming pool. And that was really it. There wasn't athletics available in the town other than when we had school athletics carnival. So I used to do those. And then when I actually, in high school, I had a choice of either going to boarding school or travelling every day by bus to Canberra. So I chose the latter one. Every day I'd go by bus. It was an hour trip there and an hour back. So I got used to travel from about a 12-year-old. And I was on the bus this day. I was probably 15 years of age, and there was a young kid on the bus, and he was very upset because his rugby league team, the coach had decided he'd had enough of them. They were a bit poorly behaved, and they were going to fold their team up, and he was very upset. And I ended up going to the committee and saying, well, why couldn't I coach them? And the guy said, well, you're a bit young to be a coach, aren't you? And I said, well, what options have you got? And he said, well, none. I said, well, I'll do it. So I took that team on, and it was just a ragtag bunch, and we had a fabulous time. So that's how I actually started coaching these young boys. I'm 15, they're 12. And it was probably the second year there. I said to one of the fathers, he was off a property, and I said to him, your son, Dean, he's a very good sprinter. You should get him coached for sprinting. And he said, you think so? And I said, yeah, I really think he could be quite good. And he went, oh, okay. When do you want me to bring him in? And that's how I became an athletics coach, because the farmer brought his son, Dean, in for me to start coaching him. And it was almost serendipity. I met a new butcher in town, was very involved in athletics where he had been, and he was all gung-ho about setting up an athletics club. So not only did I start coaching, I started an athletics club in Yass way back in about probably 1981, 82. I was still at school, and started the athletics club, and it just grew and grew, and we had quite a lot of success and a lot of fun.
So in this really long career that you've had in coaching, John, and we've obviously mentioned, you know, the Olympics and AFL grand finals, are there any sort of favourite coaching moments or achievements other than those that we may not see or be aware of? Is there any other ones that you'd pop in there as some of your favourites?
Oh yes, I think, you know, there's many, and the funny thing is, Darren, it's usually got not that much to do with an athlete's success. It's the things that happen away from the track, and the you know, the team camps that we had. Like, we'd go off on even with my own squad, I'd go off on training camps and things like that. They're the memories, and they're not all good memories. I can remember I'd coached an athlete in Melbourne for a number of years, and he was a very smart boy, and he represented Australia multiple international levels. And David was reading a book. We were actually away on an international junior trip, and David Baxter was reading a book. And I said to David, oh, what are you reading, mate? All the others are off, you know, playing cards or whatever. He's reading a book. And he was reading a book on neurosurgery. And he's like 17. And I said, what are you reading that for? He says, oh, that's what I want to do. I want to be a brain surgeon. I went, oh, okay. And anyway, sure enough, he got into medical school, and he studied medicine. And he met a girl, went off to Stockholm, and he was studying at one of the leading neuro institutes in the world on his quest to become a brain surgeon. And even now, talking to you, I can still remember the phone call and the feeling that it generated when David rang. And I said, oh, what are you ringing me for, mate, from Stockholm? And he said, I'm ringing because I need my coach. I said, oh, what are you going to make a comeback? He said, no, I need you to coach me now more than ever. He said, I've developed a brain tumour.
Yeah, it's that amazing deep connection. And I suppose, you know, we hear that coaches can be as important role models in a child's life as they can be, as parents can be.
Well, I'm glad you spoke, because I couldn't talk just then. I think it's still there, just lives with you. And you leave an indelible mark on the people that you work with, and they leave a mark on you too. You're not just coaching someone to put one foot in front of the other. You're coaching a person, and that means bringing the best out in them and hopefully the best out in you as well. And so my memories, when you ask about coaching, it's about that. And whilst that's a sad one, it's obviously underpinned by all the fabulous experiences I had as Dave's personal coach. But I've got lots of happier memories than that one. But yes, many, many memories. And it's what makes athletics such an addictive thing to be involved in, or coaching to be such an addictive thing to be involved in.
And John, I mean, some of your philosophies have already started to come out. But what are some things you really believe in when it comes to coaching? Are there things that are really embedded into your coaching, that you anchor into your coaching, that you really believe in as a coach?
Oh, well, one is coach the person. Running fast or throwing further or jumping higher, they're great outcomes, but coach the person. I also think if I'm just talking to people in track and field, coach them to be athletic. Don't coach them to be a sprinter or a jumper. Coach them to be athletic and get lots of different movement patterns into them, because you never know where they're going to go. And the athlete or the young kid might say, I'm going to be a great middle distance runner. But the reality is that that's not where they go. They might end up being a cricketer or a hockey player or a tennis player. You are laying the foundation not only for their movement patterns, but also their attitudes towards competition and sport. Things like recovery, nutrition, warm-up, all those things. That's the responsibility of a coach of a junior athlete. I think I'm very strong on that philosophy. I think that if you're not enjoying it, if you're not continuing to develop yourself, it's time to give it away. It's time to stop doing it. If you find yourself it's a chore to go, it's time to have a break and get out of there. So, yeah, that'd be my key philosophies, I think, Darren.
So do you still see yourself as a work in progress as a coach, even with all your background and long-term in the spor's environment?
Yeah. Absolutely, because every athlete that you get brings along a host of different challenges, and they're unique individuals, and different events. I mean, whether you're coaching, for me, a 100, 200, 400 meter runner, they have different nuances. But again, it's not just, especially now that I'm with older athletes, my youngest are still at school. They're like 16-year-olds at the moment, but generally speaking, my athletes of, uni and beyond, they've all got different challenges, whether that be growth related or maximal power output development, through to their personal life and balancing that study, work, training ethos and reaching their goals. So it's a constant thing. And I think you've got to keep developing yourself too. You've got to move with the times to stay relevant.
Now, we've heard that you've worked from very, very grassroots athletes, in your little athletics days, I presume working with first year in school kids out in the grass and, running them through games and things like that, right up to high performance, right at the top athletes. What did you take from coaching kids into that or did you take anything into that high performance environment? Was it much of a jump?
No, I take everything from it, because it's that is the very essence of what the sport should be, almost like an innocence and a purity, and getting down into basic movements and understanding what facilitates that. And you have to create an environment that's a good one to come to. And I was paid a very, very, very nice compliment just yesterday by Steve Solomon, actually. And Steve Solomon came over to me, and I don't coach Steve. Penny Gillies coaches Steve, but he came over and made a comment that he just thought that he'd never seen my squad happier in what they're doing. What a fabulous compliment that was, that my squad are enjoying themselves.
Yeah. Now, John, the people who joined us tonight, when they registered to join, they had the chance to pop some questions in, and I might go to some of those now.
Sure.
Now, you did mention before that you're very big on building an athlete's foundation, and that track and field can play maybe an important role in that. So what should we be focusing on as coaches in building an athlete's foundation is, I suppose, the first part, and what role can track and field maybe play in that, do you see?
A huge role. It's very, very tempting, And a lot of people take a bite of the apple. When you have a young kid, let's say a 12, 13, 14 or younger, and they're predisposed to a particular event, like maybe a distance runner or a sprinter. So we pigeonhole them into that. That's going to be their event. And we just work them in that area. I don't think that's the right thing to do. Take a more holistic point of view. Like, I've got a very good 400 metre runner in Bendiria Boyer. Now, I expect that Bendiria will break 50 seconds for the 400 metres in the not too distant future. To do that, she's going to have a sub 12 second 100 metres. So if I'd had have just taken the thing, well, let's just get her running the hundreds because she's going to be competitive there, you'd miss out on the bigger opportunity, the 4. And I don't want anyone to jump to conclusions yet. But even at this stage, I'm still not convinced that she may be even better at the 800 metres. She's only 19. So let's just see where she goes. So even at that level, I'm still leaving the option open and developing her aerobically and anaerobically in what she's doing. With young kids, I don't think you should be specialising them in a energy system, as in they're explosive fast or endurance based, or doing repeat intervals because you've read that in the Steve Cram book. That, you know, that's what worked for them, or maybe it's been embellished by the author. I think you've got to look at how the young child is coping with what you're giving them. And also, you asked me before about the philosophy. I don't know if this is a philosophy. The one thing that irritates the crap out of me is the coach that's actually coaching the kids for their own ego. It's called reflected glory. And look at who I'm coaching. And I think an athlete needs you when they haven't performed well. So judge yourself. Anyone who's listening to this now, judge yourself. When your athlete doesn't do well, that's when you're needed as the coach. When your athlete does do well, they don't need you at all. You know, so you don't need to get out there for reflected glory. And if you find yourself almost straining a hamstring, getting down out of the stands to be there in that light, you're in the wrong gig.
John, we actually hear, and this question was asked a little bit about athleticism a lot these days. It's a term that is used a fair bit. I mean, how do you see athleticism, and do you actively try and build this in the people that you're coaching?
Look, it's a great question, and it's one that I'm professionally now, because I've gone on and I've done a bit more study. So I did my first degree was in coaching and physiology. Then I went on and did my master's in science and technology, where I looked at occupational health and safety. And I then subsequently did another postgrad degree in nutrition, but always it was underpinned by the physiology. And so I work out of a clinic in Melbourne and also in Sydney as an exercise and sports physiologist, where you work in conjunction with surgeons, doctors, physios, and other allied health to treat people, sometimes through rehabilitation, but sometimes preventative wise, in terms of physical conditioning. So it's the alternate to not using drugs is to come to a ex-phys and get your body in balance. Now, I've been very, very influenced by my background in track and field about getting the body in balance. And so when you ask that question, I'm answering you as a clinician, but I'm also answering you as a high performance coach. But I hope that even a person that's just starting coaching can understand the significance of what I'm about to talk to you about. The most important thing you can do with your athlete is get their body in balance. Just look at the body, look at them front on, right versus left. You will find that, especially the teenage athletes, that they're going to be dominant on one side. You need to work to get the other side balanced. What's the back versus front? Are their back arched? Have they got not much happening around their low back glutes? It's very important to get view from front, side, back. And I will give that to my patients, but I give it to my athletes, and I just simply call it a postural analysis. I will also get them to move. I'll film my athletes front, side, and back, and I can slow that down, and I'll give them a fairly detailed biomechanical movement analysis. It does not have to be rocket surgery. Just keep it simple about what you see as the key movement patterns. Coach that into your athlete, whether they be a track athlete, a tennis player, a hockey player, a footballer. Get them to move better. It's amazing how everything else looks after itself.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Yeah, John, there were some questions about developing our own coaching capabilities, and you're a coach who's been able to move between sports and do it very, very successfully. How do you see as being a track and field coach can help with other sports?
Well, I think track and field are probably blessed because we have such a broad foundation, like as a sprints coach, but I also work with middle distance runners. In fact, before I left Sydney initially to move to Tasmania with the Institute of Sport, I was the national junior middle distance coach. And I had some very good middle distance runners, 8 and 1500 metre runners. So I also had, I suppose, that grounding, but I think it lays a great foundation for every sport. When I was asked to go and work at Essendon, I'd never seen a game of AFL. I had no interest in it. And it was just convenient, and I wanted to get back to Melbourne or to a bigger city, really. In those days, I was really wanting to get back to Sydney, but, Melbourne's halfway there from Hobart. I'll go there. So I went there, and seriously, the first game of football I ever saw was when Essendon were playing Carlton. I was their high performance manager. I'm warming them up on the ground. I didn't know one end from the other. I didn't know how they scored a goal, nothing. But that wasn't my job. My job was to get the players to move better and to be stronger over the ball and to recover after games. And if they were injured, to help work with the physios and whatever to get the players back on the track quickly. When I first went to the Bombers, a superstar player, one of the greatest players of all time in that club's rich history, was a guy called James Hird, who incidentally was a little athlete from Canberra back in the day. But James Hird came to me when I first got to the club, and he'd had a navicular stress fracture. And I thought, thank God, it's an athletics injury. Like, yes, I know how to fix that. Anyway, he broke down after about 3 weeks with his second navicular stress fracture. And fortunately, through contacts that I found in athletics from travelling the world, I'd come across a doctor in Germany who was promoting a form of treatment for bone healing. We got Therapeutics Goods Act approval, brought that into Australia. They injected it into James Hird's foot. I was along for the ride to do the rehabilitation and he's back to play. And he captained the team in that next year in the grand final. And a lot of my credibility, I think, in AFL was born from bringing back a superstar that was basically washed up and gone. If it hadn't have been for athletics and my background in athletics and the contacts I'd had, the network, but more to do with the movement and understanding of movement in track, I wouldn't have been any good to him. But no, I've been really fortunate to work with other sports. I've spent, well, more than 20 years involved with AFL, and I'm still involved with AFL in a consultancy capacity. I've taken away international rules teams to Ireland for the AFL, a couple of trips, and that was a great experience. As you said in that intro, I've worked a lot with soccer, and I travelled with the Socceroos to Kuwait and Bahrain back in the halcyon days. Actually, that was again a good experience. I don't know anything about soccer. I can't kick a ball, but I can teach the players how to get to the ball. I can teach players how to move more quickly into defence, and I can help them recover so they can bounce back in. And if their body's out of alignment, I can get them stronger so that that's no longer an issue. I've worked with swimmers. I had a lot to do with, I'm certainly not claiming any of the credit for his success, but Daniel Kowalski, who was one of Australia's greatest ever swimmers back about 15, 20 years ago. And I worked with Daniel, but that was more to do with strength and recovery, joint movement and explosivity to get off the blocks quicker. So you can take a lot of the things that you learn from there, but you also speak to them as a coach. And I think one of my strengths when I was with Essendon particularly was I had left as a high performance coach with the AIS to then go into AFL. They weren't used to a person really coaching. And that's what I was. I was a fitness coach. And I talked to the players as a coach. And you've got to remember, a lot of the coaches, especially back in 98, 99, 2000, they were ex-players, they hadn't necessarily done much in terms of coaching. So when you come in and you start talking to players as a coach, players listen. And so athletics really gave me all of that foundation, Darren.
And it sounds like on a number of occasions you've had to work to coming into a new environment. You've got to get buy-in from the athletes into your program. And in fact, someone did ask about buy-in. What can coaches do to encourage athletes and maybe even parents of junior athletes to buy into their programs? Where do they start?
Honesty. Be honest. And be authentic. You hear that a lot these days, you know, when we're talking about all these different feel-good programs, especially in this COVID era. But you've got to be genuinely authentic and understand why you are doing what you're doing. And if you have genuine care for people, I think that people sense that, and you get buy-in instantly. I've long worked to an acronym that I originally gave to my athletes, but it's the way I would work my own program anyway. And it's CNN. And when I talk about CNN, people would be thinking of the cable news network from America. And in a way, that was part of the why I use it, because if there's going to be a earthquake in Ecuador and a news flash comes across the bottom of the screen with CNN, I want to be in my athlete's head to remind them of what we're training for. The C stands for consistency. You've got to be consistent. So as the coach, you have to be consistent in your mood, your behaviour, your delivery. If you say you're going to do something, then that's exactly what you're going to do. And the athletes come to rely on that and they depend on that. Consistency underpins success. N stands for no compromise. You can't say, I'm going to be the best coach that I can be, but you don't pick up a coaching book, or you don't attend a seminar, or you don't mix with other coaches, you don't go to conferences. You can't say, oh yeah, well I can't get to training tonight. I'm a bit tired from work, so look, we'll catch up on it next week. And the second N is no doubt. No doubt that what you're doing is the right way. And if you don't have all the knowledge, you can strengthen your no doubt by bringing in other coaches that are more knowledgeable than you are. One of the big fallacies in coaching is that there's secrets. We've got special secrets. You don't have secrets. What you have is insecurity. And if a coach says he's got a secret and he's keeping his programs, move on to somebody else quickly. Get away from there. Consistency, no compromise, no doubt, and watch your program flourish. And your athletes will be drawn to you because you're a leader of them.
Thanks for that, John. I'm sure people are all scribbling down that acronym and making notes on that. So, look, there was a very specific a question specific to track and field here. So your background, we heard, relay coaching at the Sydney 2000 Olympics. So if we can get quite track and field specific now, do you have any thoughts on batten passing and how the batten should be passed, and on the creation of check marks for athletes, John?
Yes. Well, on the batten pass, for 4x1, I'm assuming that's going to be, it's a downward pass is the quickest way to do that. But it's very important to teach the correct manner of the hand. So the hand, give the big target for them to get in. It's important that the athletes realise that when you're coming in with the batten, it's your job to give the batten, not for the other athlete to take the batten. So you've got to push the batten in. I would always measure out that the relay is about, have the basic philosophy, it's not the athletes that's important here, it's the batten. If the batten doesn't get around the track, it doesn't matter how fast you are. So the batten becomes your focus, not the individuals. So moving that batten and keeping it at constant speed around the circuit, that's the key. So when it comes into the change zone, it mustn't slow down. And if it slows down, that's a weakness in my coaching and or the weakness in the athlete execution. So we would be working very hard on our check marks so that the athlete would be looking back as the athlete crosses that point, then they take off so that the batten does not slow down at any point in time. So I've been fortunate to be involved with a number of different relays across my time. And I've been associated with some of our best relays at under 20s with World Juniors, and those national records still stand for men's and women's in 4x1 and 4x4s, and also at the higher levels of our national squads. We've got, I've been associated with some of the best, and I think it's just important to stay true to the task and keep the athlete focused on what they're doing, not trying to explode out of there. Get their focus on the batten, not on, I hope I'm fast enough, or I hope they're not going to catch me. Don't worry about that. Just worry about what they have to do. Focus on the mark, focus on the batten.
Thanks for that, John. And look, I do encourage people, if they've got any other questions that they would like John to address, please pop them in the chat box. You feel free to do that at any stage, and we'll keep an eye on the chat box. I've got one, John. Something just came to mind right then. I am always asked by parents, what order should relay teams run in? What type of runner should you put first? What type of runner should you put second, third, fourth? Do you have any thoughts about that? Any guidelines that you would use?
Yeah, well, again, I'm going to limit this. I can go on to the other if you want, but to 4x1s, not 4x4s. So 4x1s, you actually look at the leg of each thing, and you might be thinking, well, surely they're all running 100 metres, but in fact they don't. The shortest leg is the first leg and the last leg. So your second and third runners are going to run a greater distance. So for goodness sake, make sure that your athlete that's got a bit of speed endurance is running the longer leg. I would put my fastest runner in the back straight. I would then put my best bend runner on the top curve, so that they come together, and then you've got your fighter is going to be last and your best starter is going to go first. It's a shared glory. And at the end of the day, people will not remember that time of glory where the fastest kid runs over the line first. They'll remember the team that runs first. You can break that down a little bit more. It may be that you're looking at what hand they get the batten in. So one of the great challenges for junior coaches especially is not to get the kids to change hands when they've got the batten. It risks dropping that batten, and it also slows the batten down. Remember, one of your changes is to keep the batten at a constant pace. So if you're running and changing hands, you are compromising your speed. No compromise, remember. So we have to make sure that your first runner has the batten in their right hand, second's getting it in their left, third's getting in the right, left. So make sure that they, if you can, if it works, it may be better that your left dominant runner is getting the batten in that hand. That could be another consideration. Not essential, but handy if you can use it.
Yeah, and I do remind anyone, if they'd like to ask any follow-up questions to any of these, please pop those questions in the chat box. So just moving on, John, what can we do as coaches to just, keep kids, teenagers, whatever, in love with the sport? It's a tough gig. It can be, track and field sometimes, but what can we do as coaches?
Worry about yourself first. So if you're going to save the sinking ship, make sure you save yourself first. So make sure that as the coach, you're in love with the sport as well. Make sure you're loving it, because that will then enthusiasm, it's infectious and it rubs off on them. And understand that loving the sport doesn't necessarily mean winning. Loving the sport means improving. Loving the sport means social camaraderie. Loving the sport means belonging. Loving the sport means creativity. Loving the sport means personal expression. Loving the sport means being involved in something bigger than yourself. Loving the sport means having a goal. Loving the sport means having someone that you respect. Loving the sport means having someone other than mum and dad that you can turn to when you need. Look after yourself first. They'll follow you.
Now, John, you've, as I said, we've mentioned a couple of times, you've worked in grassroots right up to high performance. And I wonder if you've seen any athletes who you worked with sort of towards the grassroots level then go on to high performance. I'm interested, are there any particular traits that stand out in those kids that you see, or the people that you see make it to the top?
Yes. When they're little, it's supportive parents. Don't get that confused with pushy ones. Supportive parents who are there to encourage them no matter what. It's people that have a longer term view. For young kids, it tends to be, not always, but in most cases, it tends to be the late developers are the ones that come through at the end. I think they develop a resilience and a tenacity. And I think it's one of the things that maybe I'm showing my age here, but I get worried when we give out just participation medals for everything. I think kids have to learn what it's like to come first, second, or last. Hey kids, welcome to life, because that's how it goes. And create activities where kids can experience winning, of course, but I think it's important for those kids to learn resilience and fight and understand, I was going to say work ethic, but it's not so much a work ethic, because kids, they've just got that in spades. It's more to do with teach them how to set up goals and where they need to go. I'm very big on goal setting and having collective focus on where you want to go to. And if I go back even to the Olympics, that was very much a part of my focus with the group in 2000 for the men's and women's teams, that we had goals. In fact, they're sitting on my wall here. That's it there, if you can see that. That's one of the mission statements from the men's team, and it's all signed by the team. And I had big ones that we took out onto the warm-up track. We probably looked like dorks to the rest of the world, but who cares? The athletes bought into it, and we had collective goals. But I do that even with my own squad. In fact, next week, they're coming to my place and we're sitting down with my squad to do a goal session. I've got special guests coming in, and we're doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things. We could save that for another seminar, perhaps.
Part two, maybe, John. Now, a question has come through the chat box. Now, we talked about great coaching moments and achievements, John. It says, what are your proudest coaching moment? Not necessarily your best, but your proudest. What comes to mind when you think of that?
Gee, that's a big question. My proudest moment for me as a coach. Wow, I've had
even
a lot.
just one of the one that sort of stands out when we talk about pride and proud, I suppose, because I can probably understand that you would have had a few over the years.
Yes, my proudest moment was probably Lauren Hewitt making a final at Olympic Games level and running her personal best. And there were a lot of challenges along the way to get there. So Loz jumps into my mind, but I'm also, in my mind is spinning just stories of athletes that I've worked with. You know, I've had athletes with disabilities, and recently I've been coaching a young boy that's had cerebral palsy, and to see him grow and flourish, that's a proud moment for me. So no, too many to speak to. Sorry, it's a bit of a dud answer, but I'll probably go to bed tonight and think of 3 or 4. But, I think I'm only hesitating because I want this to come across the right way, but I think you just fall in love with your athletes, and I mean that in the right way. You fall in love with your athletes where you just want them to achieve everything that they're capable of. And so you become proud of each and every one of them, almost like they're your own kids, and you see how they grow. I've just had in my house, I've got one athlete. He's a refugee, and he stayed here after the Commonwealth Games, and to see how he's been able to grow and put his life together, it's inspiring. I'm proud of them. But is that coaching? That that I'm there to support them. It's sorry if it is a dud answer, but I'm proud of all of my athletes that I've worked with.
Yeah, no, I certainly don't see that as a dud answer. It just sounds like you've had so many proud moments. It's very, very hard to pinpoint one in particular. John, someone starting out as a coach, or even people who are coaching, but number one tip, if for coaches starting out, or the tip that you wished you had got when you first started coaching, can you give us one?
Yes, I would say to you, how long is a plumber spending his apprenticeship? And how long does an electrician take? And with all respect to any plumbers or electricians that are listening to this, coaching is far more intricate and involved than that. So serve your apprenticeship and understand that it's a long-term commitment. And I've been as you said in the intro, I think you were actually quite flattering. You said 35 years, but I'm starting to look at 40. I can see it coming up really close. And I'm still learning things about myself and about the nuances of coaching, because you're constantly challenged. Every athlete that comes to you, you've got to have a different approach and understand you've got to do your apprenticeship and don't be in a hurry to be a success, and make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons. Get your philosophy of why you're coaching. Why are you actually doing this? Are you doing it for you, or are you doing it for the athlete? And if you're doing it for the athlete, which I think you should be, what do you have to learn to do that? And if you don't know the answer, look for the people that do. Someone knows someone, and create your network. It's a very trendy term these days. I've got a couple of gigs. I work at the University of Technology here in Sydney. I do sessional lecturing there in sports science, but I'm also involved in a program there as a mentor, and I mentor 5 sports science students. One of my favourite jobs, I work at a private school here, Scots College, and I'm a mentor to 20 boys in year 12. And so this week I meet my new intake for 2021, and I work with them and I mentor them through the challenges that they have day to day, week to week, month to month. We should be doing more of that in coaching. I'd like to think that I've often taken on different coaches and I've tried to develop them and grow them, not give them the answers necessarily, might challenge them or support them, push them, prod them. But look for a mentor that you can trust and relate to, that has the knowledge base that you have. That's what I think a beginner coach should have. Understand you're an apprentice. Understand that it's a long journey. Understand you need a guide.
Yeah, and in fact, it's an interesting one, John. Obviously, I've spoken to a few people on these Sunday coaching sessions, and that mentoring side of things comes out quite a lot as what people suggest is a place where people should start. So it seems to be quite a thing that maybe sports and athletics should be looking quite deeply into.
Yeah, I think, Darren, it's okay not to know. You don't have to know everything, and it's going to throw up different challenges along the way, and it might be just the way an athlete moves. Just go and search for the answers. One of the best areas I have got over time, and look, I've been fortunate in particularly when I went to the AFL. If an athlete or a player got injured, I could go with them to the doctor. If they went to surgery, I could go in and gown up and have a look at what was going on. So I got to actually look at what was going on and understand at that level. Now, I don't suggest that every coach has to do that, but if you develop an interest in what's going on here, I think that does make you better too. And just involve as big a network as you can, whether that be doctors, surgeons, allied health, massage therapists, people that can help grow your knowledge. You don't have to be the expert, but you've got to be able to access that. Access the people.
Yeah. Now, John, going forward, what's coming up next for you in coaching? What's on the horizon for you?
Yeah, well, I've never worked a day in my life, to be really honest. I went from working for Little Athletics, and I went to university while I was at Little Athletics. I used to just do part-time as well at Little A's. And then by the time I'd finished, I'd rolled into a job at the AIS, who sent me on a secondment to Tasmania. By the time it was sort of coming to its end after 6 years or so, I had found myself in Melbourne working for Essendon. Then I set up my own business and then rolled into doing consultancy work with the Socceroos and tennis and whatever. Then I get a knock on the door about coming to work for the Giants. And so come up to Sydney and back where it all began. And then as this has been going on, and it came to an end. I've got my clinic, and as I've talked to you before, I'm doing consulting role at UTS and so on. But on the side of that, I've developed my own squad, and I see that as a job. I just love it. And at the moment, I've got 15 athletes in my squad, and I've brought in my previous assistant coach down in Tasmania as my co-coach with this group, Di Huxley. So Di works alongside of me with this group. And we're doing all sorts of things, and they're young and they're talented and they're motivated and they're driven, and so am I. And so what am I going to be doing? Well, I'm on for the ride. I'm on for that journey for the next 10 years, as long as they'll have me, to try and bring out the absolute best in each and every one of those athletes that I'm working with. But then on the side, I can see myself doing more work in this education role, whether that be with UTS's lecturing, and certainly in a mentoring role. And I'm very much of the philosophy of keeping my options open, because you just never know what's going to come up next and what's around the corner. And and in along the way, while I'm focusing on developing that side, I want to develop myself a bit more too, because I think that I've got still a hell of a lot to learn about what makes me tick and what can be done. And I'm doing different things in and around that space now. I've kept the study stuff going, but I'm moving more into probably a little bit more self-reflective mode now, and hopefully that can keep going. But in terms of what's next, someone said, when do you think you'll retire? It will not. I can't ever imagine it entering my consciousness. I haven't worked. You can't retire if you've never worked.
So, John, for anybody listening who's joined us live tonight, or anybody who's watching the replay or the recording or listening to the podcast, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way that they can get in touch with you, John?
Well, firstly, I'd say that to reach out is one of the most flattering things that you can do for a coach, because you're asking someone's opinion, or like coming on to here is such a nice thing for a person to receive, to be asked your opinion on something. So don't hesitate, if there's a coach listening, to reach out. And so the easiest thing is, and I sound like a bit of a wanker, I know, but if you go to Google and you type in John Quinn, it should take you to my website. So I've got a business, and my business is Quinn Elite Sports Services. And on there, it'll have everything from my mobile phone number to my Twitter account to my email address. So whatever format you want, please jump on there, and look forward to bringing you into the fold.
Well, John, it's been a fantastic and fascinating session. I really thank you for your time and the generosity of your answers. It's been absolutely fantastic having you on Sunday Coaching School, and all the best going forward.
My pleasure. And now, never forget where I've come from with Little Athletics. I take Little Athletics. It's touched my career through every aspect of where I've been. It's been a fabulous organisation. If I can give just anything back to Little Athletics in this country, you don't even have to finish the question. The answer is yes. And I just look forward to continuing to grow as a coach. And if I can be involved in anyone's journey along the way, I'll enjoy that too.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you, Darren.